been living in a constant fear for a long time, which is the most people doesn't want to experience whatsoever. Trust me, it is not something that you really want to do. I was had some quite experience myself. I lived for a constant fear for 6 years between age 15 to 21. But I was not the only one who actually experienced this. This happened to my two younger sisters, Joanna, who is currently 24 years old, but this happened when she was between 13 and 18, and to my younger sister, Molly, who is currently 20 years old, but this happened when she was between 9 and 15 years old. And all I can say is, I really wished all of this wouldn't have happened. But it's it's a very strong moment, a strong memory, and I still remembers every single things that happened to me and what my sisters experienced. I will go back to all this happened. This happened in Ohio, and even if this is not for privacy, but I don't even care if I even mention the exact place or not, but I prefer not to otherwise. And this happened between 2012 and 2018, so about 6 years. Let's go back to the very start when all this happened. When I was just 15 years old, I was just barely in high school, and my sisters were still also quite young at the time. And my family has never been a very deeply religious, but it happened that we sometimes went to church, sometimes in a Sunday, or we even took part of the church, events like some for Easter or something like that. But one day when my parents and I were at the church, my sister, who was 13, was actually home looking after Molly at the time. And so me and my parents, we went to church. And it went out like and nothing as just like the normal times. We listened to the priest, read some stories and all that. And afterwards, my parents was actually approached by a man and a woman around the same age of my parents. They mentioned that they actually were looking for recruits to join their religious group or their side of church since, and well, my parents, like I said, was not very much deeply religious, but they were actually offered to could see this place, just see how it was like. So they decided to just go themselves just to be and see what this place was like. So they actually had asked me and my 13-year-old sister, Joanna, to look after Molly at the time, who was still just 9 years old. And since I was 15 and had been quite responsible looking after my younger sisters before, so that my parents trusted me. So this place that they went was also located on the Ohio countryside, since we lived or still live in Ohio, and I was really surprised that all this happened. Well, the thing is, they went to this, well, what they told me when I came home a few hours later was this big farm. I was like, a normal farm, like cattle and all that. Instead of this farm was actually more secluded, more as there were no big neighbors for miles. They was surrounded by deep woods, and they did have a lot of cows, pigs, chickens, and even a lot of farmlands, but they grown corn, basically any type of things. And they were this farm was like almost like the Amish, except that this had modern technology like tractors, you name it. And this was more as a self-efficient farm. They preferred not to be involved much else with the outside world, unnecessary if the things needed, like if were needed some medical treatments or anything like it. My parents had actually been invited with my sisters and I to spend at least one weekend to see if we actually would like the place. And for some reason, even when we went there for just a weekend, we actually, well, even though this was before my family and I was decided to stay there, I will get to that in a moment. Um, you see, I actually had a lot of good times with the other kids who was in there. There were actually several dozens of other kids around the same ages, like from toddlers to teenagers and even somewhere in their mid-20s. And but even some of the kids actually asked me if I was that religious, what I thought about Jesus, and if I thought about, all kinds of things. And if I had realized that there was a red flag back then, it was like almost like that they were trying to brainwash me to believe in their beliefs of how the Bible was actually being interpreted. Well, I wasn't much as a big fan, or I wasn't much religious at all. I mean, I did go to church just to make my parents happy. I mean, I do respect other people's beliefs, that I do. But after that day, when we came back home after the weekend, my parents actually had decided to suddenly sell our home and pull all of us from the school, and we sold most of our belongings. We were only allowed to keep some things like some, well, books that we need, that we like to read, but certain books were not allowed, like Harry Potter or something like that, or horror books was not allowed. But books about some, um, teaching kids how to read, something like that, was allowed. Coloring books was allowed. And we were stunned, especially me. I had just about to start high school, and I was being not allowed. I was like, I could stay with some of my friends or maybe another relative in town while my parents would decide to go there. But they decided I was not allowed. So, even though me and my older sister, my sister Joanna, we made a fuss, we argued, debated if we could stay with some of our relatives. But my parents was affirmed we were not allowed. And in fact, shortly after we moved to this farm, we were actually given a small cabin. There were apparently several cabins in the area that most of families actually lived in. There was only one house that was a major building, like a builder, like at least like normal house building. That was the major, apparently the owner of the farm. I was at the time believed maybe this was just going to be for a short time, but if I knew how long we would stay there, for 6 long years. And in fact, it didn't take long for I to realize that this was actually is more old religious group wasn't as unlike any the church that I have been to. And in fact, this leader or the owner was actually a leader of some secluded religious Christian group. I knew what some people would say, well, that's just normal. Well, kinda. It depends on how you see it. But after I left the place, yeah, I've been a little bit ahead of myself there, but after I left, I figured out this was a cult. And at the time, I didn't even knew much about cults. I only heard about it from few friends. But when we were actually there, shortly after we had settled in, we were taught about going to some sort of Sunday church, and we were given tasks on what to do. Men were supposed to be taking care of the, well, machinery and take care of like hunting, fishing, while the women took care of most of the animals, like chickens, cows, and you name it. When I asked my parents one day if we could have one of some of our friends come over, well, my parents, they didn't even know if that was even allowed or not, so they had to ask some of the other members of this community, since who had been there much longer, and they said that was not allowed unless they had permission from our leader or the owner of the place. And I was really surprised that they were not allowing it. But I asked, what about relatives? like grandparents, uncles, aunts, like that, or cousins. They were allowed, but only if the permission was still being given by leader. And for first year, I was like, I didn't mind. There was a constant always work with some the kings. But I had to admit, at least one of the things that I really much had enjoyed to do was to work on the mechanics. Before all this, I even helped my dad to work on the car from time to time. So at least I had some experience, and the other adult men, they saw me how I was skilled with some of the machinery, and actually one of the men took me under his wing as some sort of apprentice. He wanted me to be teaching others about how to be repairing some machinery, like if there was a generator, tractor, or even some other farm equipment. And at that place, at that moment, I thought that that wasn't that bad. Me, apprentice of a person, and being able to show the same skills to others, that was not that bad. Even my father was proud that I was given an apprenticeship. But it didn't take long for that. Because one day during dinner, this was around our first year living in this place, my mom actually approached during the dinner that she had been told that there was a man in the community that was interested in her in marriage. My dad at first was outraged, because in God there can only be one man and one wife at either marriage. But when he approached this to the leader, he told us, or at least he told my dad, that this was a different type of allowed, because he saw this in the Bible. Because if we mention, like, he believed that a man should be allowed to have as many wives or as many husbands as they wanted. And I was like, okay, but I thought maybe my mom was not going to do it. But it turned out, just before the summer that year, my mom and that man actually got married. And the owner was actually a priest, apparently. I didn't find out until much later. And at first my dad was not happy about this. But it's just one thing that has happened is that, it turned out that this man wanted to have more children. But it turned out that my mom told him that she can't have any more because she had herself sterilized. And and he was outraged. And he made a final divorce against her. My mom was surprised of that, but she didn't bother. But it didn't take long for a woman actually fall interested in my dad. And same thing happened to them. They actually got married sometime in the summer, and I was stunned. I was really so surprised of anything. And this woman actually had a few kids of her own, biological kids and even stepkids, and they called me brother, despite I didn't even saw them as my siblings whatsoever. And in fact, I even told them that you're not my siblings. You're not my siblings. I don't believe in what this man told us. That made them angry. Apparently they told their mom, and she told my parents, and they later found out about this, and he wasn't happy about my statement. But since I was only like 15, he actually gave me a pass this time. So, and you may like, since this happened like 6 years, what did my dad and this woman actually have any kids? Well, unfortunately they did, at least 2 daughters of their own. And since that happened, my dad actually moved out from our cabin and lived with with his new wife. So it was just me, my 2 sisters, and my mom in this cabin. And since my dad left us like that, I became the new man in the house, so to speak. And I had to step in as the role as the man and look after my sisters, especially my younger one, Molly. And we started to realize this wasn't a good place to be at. I heard stories that if someone actually tried to leave, they were not being allowed because once you've been a member in this community, you were not allowed to leave because it would be only severe punishment. I was like, this is not a safe place, and even told my mom about this. And well, unfortunately, she had by the time also been taught to believe that this was only safe place on earth. This was the next step before paradise. She told me not to stop speaking like that, and it I only realized my mom had been brainwashed by this some of the strongest belief. I was dumbfounded. But I asked my sister Joanna what she thought about this place. If she wanted to live in this place or if she missed her friends or old family. And what she did. Even Molly wished that she could spend some time with our grandparents. And in fact, we haven't even heard from any of our family members outside the world for over a year at this point. We had no idea what's been happening around outside world because, in fact, if we wanted to have any news like newspaper or TV, that was not even a thing that didn't even exist here. There were no radios, no TVs, or not even newspaper. In fact, those things were actually banned from this place. Because according to this leader, this was the devil's way to spread false rumors and the prophecy of Jesus' second coming. I realized at that point we were not in a safe place. But I told Joanna and Molly not to believe anything what the priest or the other people tell you. Only believe what you have been told before. And if they have any problems, always comes to me and talk. And I'm always telling them that was true. But the kids were allowed to play around as together as normal. Where you had Sunday school in the early noon, and even had school sometimes in the afternoon or sometimes even in the evenings. I was really devastated, but I kept my cool down, even as as a 16-year-old. In my apprenticeship of this man of mechanics, well, I started to lose interest that I didn't want to do it anymore, and when I did mention this one man that I kind of didn't want to do this anymore, he was surprised but almost angry. Because that I was going to take it replaced he replaced his role as mechanic when he's going to sort of quote unquote retire. I was dumbfounded. I thought that he was only teaching me this so that I could be maybe some sort of backup mechanic if something happened. Apparently, he was the chief engineer or chief mechanic of this place, and I was going to be his replacement. I going to be replaced him. That was one thing I never had intentionally. And if anyone was caught leaving the vicinity of this property, they would have been punished. I heard one kid actually got punished enough to be put in the cellar for a whole night without any food, and he was not allowed to be talked to by anyone, not even his own family if they even tried. Only when he apologized he was never going to do it, everyone just talked back. It's like nothing happened. It's like nothing had happened. This happened not only to just one kid, multiple ones. And in fact, Molly could have been happening if I hadn't stopped her from leaving the property line. We have been shown exactly where this property line went, so that we didn't cross it. But how would they know if we did it? Well, apparently they had some camera systems in the vicinity. The leader had one camera system around the property, and even had some of the other members just make patrol sometime around the vicinity. I was dumbfounded. Now there was not possible for even to escape this place. But there was one thing I really wanted to do. So for the next several years, from 16 to 21, I was really scared how things would change. I was really scared. But I later find out one that really shocked me. And as I was by that point, I was about 18, a legal age. A man had a younger a boy my age had actually at the time shown interest in Joanna. I was like 18 and she was just 2 years younger than myself. She was 16. And my mom was actually quite happy that this young man, wanted to marry my sister. So I was dumbfounded. I only asked my mom calmly, like, isn't that she's too young to get married? But then my mom told me some of the girls at this place was either married at for 16 or 17. I was, and she expected me I would do the same thing soon to pick a wife to marry, settle down, to start a family with. I was like, what? I mean, I never saw that, I never reacted to that, or even said it to my mom because I know how she reacted. But I nodded and said, well, I actually never thought about it, I said, like. But it was then I realized I really had to leave. But it was only a small problem. If I left, my sisters would be unguarded, unprotected by me. Because when I was around, no people would even mess around with me because I was, by the time, I was like 6 feet tall. And I'm like, wow, 6'4" now or something like that. Or actually, no, I'm still 6 feet. But still. I was bulky, and despite being a bit like a mechanic, I did a lot of exercise to keep in shape. And it was actually something that the leader wanted us to do to keep us in good shape and good health. So I did want to just do this. And after that, I became the next chief mechanic. I had more permission to leave the property line, go in town to get supplies and all that since I have the permission. I even had a license at the time also. And I just did that. And it happened that I actually went to see relatives when I was in town for that and informed them what happened. I told them that we are fine and I'm hoping that when eventually soon enough I will be able to live with my sisters. I never mentioned what my dad did with his new wife, and my mom actually wanted my sister Joanna to get married. So long story short on that, I also give my family and friends hopes that I will be out of this place soon. But even if I knew that it will take maybe another year or two, but luckily though, Joanna, when she was approached by this young man like in my age, asked for her hand in marriage, she said no, because she didn't want to get married yet. She wanted to wait at least that she is 18. And the leader was actually asked why. Well, considering that in her age, she was just 16 and she had just even finished supposed schooling yet. And she just wanted to, in her words, she just wanted to finish her schooling first, then can she start to get the family, get married, a family of her own. And the leader actually agreed on that. And at least that gave me 2 years time to figure out a way to get me, Joanna, and Molly out of this place. And, well, let's say I was scared. But when I was 21 years old, around 2018, Joanna was 18, and Molly, well, she was just still around 14, 15, but I had now enough of this place. And I had actually managed to get access to more as promised. I mean, people trusted me good enough, far enough, as much as I could do anything I could do. I could leave the property without being even questioned. Only ask what I was going to do, as it gets more supplies, more seeds for the next far harvest and all that. Well, that was happened. So one night, I actually took my sister Molly and Joanna and only a few things in our car that I actually had put away for it to be used as an escape vehicle. And we left middle of the night, even despite we probably would spot it. But what did I do? I just left. My sisters was hiding in the back seat, hoping that they would even be shot at, but that never happened though. Um, but they were afraid of being spotted, so we just left. We only went to our uncle and aunt's place that was not that far from town, and we only stayed there for maybe just over the night. And and even my parents had no idea what my sisters has actually been. I mean, I left a note that I was only going to town for um just going to more supplies, and I will only be gone for about a day or so. It depends on what I required. And since I would never ask, never question about that, so at least I wouldn't have to be worried. But I was. After just one day, even though the convincing from my uncle and aunt, my aunt, to tell me to stay, that we're safe. But I told them, as long as my parents are still part of this community, and it was then that we all of us, me, my sisters, actually told my aunt and uncle exactly what has been going on. They were shocked. My aunt, my mom's sister, she was horrified. But I told her that we are not staying here. We actually decided I'm to take my sisters to another place far away from here. Both my uncle and aunt actually pleaded us to stay, that we were safe. But I told them as long as we were still in the same town, not in that close to the farm, we were not safe. There's only a matter of time before they would actually try to find my sisters. And even though Joanna was 18, legal age, they would even cared. But Molly was the one I was most afraid of, that she would just been taken. So my aunt and uncle agreed it was probably for the best. But my uncle, he told me that he had a friend who lived 2 states away, which he served in the war. I believe it was in the Vietnam War together. He was a very much trustworthy friend, and I actually had met his old friend a couple of times before when he was in town. So my aunt gave me so much food that we needed and some cash, and I refueled my car, and we said our goodbyes, and I told them that we would call them when we had arrived and in safety. Even though during the ride there, my sister was always on high alert, they always looked back almost to just make sure that they weren't followed. But we weren't, and I was horrified if they would somehow find out where we were going. But after some time, we arrived to my uncle's friend's place. It was this small type of country-style house in the outskirts of the town, and he was pretty much welcomed us. My sisters were, well, still scared of him, but since they actually, well, Molly was a little bit scared of him since she hasn't met him that much. But I have met him a few times, and so had Joanna. But every time Molly actually started to like him. He was like a big teddy bear, to be honest. But we was allowed to stay there as long as we wanted. And in fact, we are even still at the same place, even to this now, in the year 2023. Joanna was pretty much, at the time, was really happy. She's 24 years old now, and Molly is just 20 years old. We have from time to time talked about our experience and time in this. And what about our parents? Did they even try to find us? Oh yes. They actually reached out to my uncle and aunt, tried to ask them if they had seen us. But like from both my aunt and uncle was actually good liars, and they were even hard to they were actually believe a single word. They told my parents that we had went to California, was across the country, to be staying there. But my parents somehow never actually tried to track us down. I don't know if there's somehow deep down in their minds that they were happy that we were safe from this community. But at the same time, I don't know. And some of my new friends in this town had asked me, what about your stepsisters or your half-sisters that my dad had with his new wife? Well, I wish I could have taken them with him as well, but Yeah, it would have been a much problem. They were probably only brainwashed by the time, and even though I wish I could see them or even see them again, but yeah, probably not. And then some of my coworkers at my work and some friends had asked me, "What about just going back and see your parents? Try to tell them exactly how you felt." Well, like I said earlier, how my mom was very excited my sister Joanna was getting married when she was 16. So yeah, and how my dad just suddenly left our house or the cabin to live with the new wife and have a family with her, rather than staying there. So yeah, that statement alone from both my parents, they're no longer part of my life. And the day when I have kids, I will never to let them meet my kids. Or, well, basically, Joanna or Molly would not allow it the same thing. We all are happy as we are. So please, mom and dad, let us never meet ever again.